Disaster preparedness is not something you can address with a storm on the horizon. You need to plan ahead, and you need to know what your response is going to be well beforehand. So we have a couple of experts with us, some supplier partners, and we're going to talk through some prep tips. Bobby, Dan, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks for having us, Kurt.
So let's start off with a general question for the both of you. Why is it important to prepare for disasters ahead of time? Dan, let's start with you.
Well, as a nation, we've faced a couple of unique situations in the last 10 years with Ebola and COVID. And of course, we've seen man-made disasters, things like the Gulf oil spill. And the challenge is when bad things happen, especially if it's on a grand scale, everybody and their brothers trying to scramble to get their hands on protective apparel and supplies to deal with the emergency. And unfortunately, none of our supply chains, as manufacturers and distributors, we're just not, we're not set up to stockpile and sit on staggering quantities of material just in case something bad happens. There's shelf life on materials, et cetera. And the time to think about getting your hands on the products that you need is not when the disaster is happening. It's got to be done ahead of time. And one of the challenges you've got with that is trying to anticipate what it's going to be. If you're in a community where you've got a chemical plant right down the road, you can kind of anticipate some of the types of disasters that might be man-made based upon things that are in your environment. But on the broader scale, things like pandemics and natural disasters are impossible to predict. So you'd rather be prepared than being caught flat-footed.
Bobby, Dan took all of the good points. I bet you have nothing left.
Well, yes and no, I guess. Dan made some great points. If you don't have the product on hand and you need it, you're kind of out of luck there. But I would say that there are two main reasons that you really want to be focused on being prepared. First and foremost is the safety of the employees and the visitors to your facility or your operation. If you don't have what you need on hand to address an emergency when it happens, if people don't know where to go or what to do when an emergency happens, it increases the likelihood that someone gets injured in the process or some unforeseen thing happens to create more damage to the facility or the property. And in worst cases, people could, unfortunately not make it. So having, what you need on hand, having all the products and supplies on hand to address any kind of an emergency when it should happen helps to make sure that everyone stays safe. Everyone goes home the way they came to work, and make sure, first and foremost, that no one's injured. And second, and one that's not often, I think, associated with being prepared, is getting back to normal day-to-day operations. If you're not prepared to react to these emergencies when they happen, then it's going to extend your downtimes. Yes, you want to have what you need on hand in case something does happen, and primarily for the safety and the benefit of those around you. It's also critical for maintaining business.
I actually love that point. I took a little mini note there that we don't talk about getting back to normal enough. We always talk about preparedness, but getting back to normal is something that is equally important in some ways. But Dan, we're kind of talking about the steps that people can take to prep. So what do you got for us?
Well, one of the other things that's really important to make sure that you got in your plan is training. It's all well and fine to have the materials, supplies, et cetera, that you need for emergency response. But if the first time a person's seen a piece of PPE is when they've got to put it on during a crisis, that's probably not a really good scenario to be in.
No.
So in addition to making sure you've got the correct products on hand or supplies on hand to deal with a potential emergency, you want to make sure that your personnel that are responsible for responding and functioning in that environment are well trained and understand exactly the ins and the outs of how these products are supposed to be used.
I see what you're saying there. So, Bobby, how can Brady's products help in a disaster preparedness type of way?
Yeah, so at Brady, we have a wide range of products that can be used to help companies prepare for disasters. Products that range everywhere from lockout tagout devices to facility identification, such as our floor tapes and our wayfinding signs, and OSHA labels and tags that help identify the routes and the processes needed in the event of emergency. But one of the products that is critical to helping companies stay prepared is our SPC absorbance control line. Products such as absorbent mats, rolls, spill kits are critical to helping companies maintain safe environments for employees, from everything from the emergencies that happen when vat busts open to everyday operations where you might have a normal leak that can get into a walkway. So again, helping keep people safe is number one priority, but also getting back to helping with that maintaining of operations and getting back to business faster. If you have these products on hand and they're readily available for companies to react to the situation, it gets people back to the day to day much, much faster.
I hear what you're saying, and I couldn't agree more. I do want to switch back to Dan for a second. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to tell me, we're talking about disaster preparedness. Is there a type of Tyvek suit or Tyvek product in general that we really should be thinking about?
Well, the challenge is, we offer an extremely wide range of protective apparel, everything from a dirty job suit to the fully encapsulated level A suit. And as an emergency preparedness coordinator, one of the challenges you have is trying to anticipate just exactly what that particular hazard might be. Um, we've got, for example, the Tyvek 800 is a fabric that passes viral penetration, so it's essentially a biohazard suit. But if you're considering something a little more nefarious, perhaps a terrorism event with some sort of a chemical agent, you'd need to be in an entirely different fabric-based garment. And of course, my favorite there is the Tychem 6000 because it's impervious to white powders, passes viral penetration, and we've got permeation data for all the chemical warfare agents and a staggering number of toxic industrial chemicals. So, if I was looking at a biological hazard, I'd probably be in the Tyvek 800J. If I'm more concerned about a chemical type event or even a particulate type event, I may go to the Tychem 6000. But we've got an extremely wide range. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a facility that's down the road from a chemical plant, well, it's a pretty finite number of things that are going to be at that plant. You can plan for what the release might be. So, emergency preparedness has a lot of different colors, if you will, based upon what it is that we anticipate we're going to have to respond to. And that's, the challenge for our safety professionals, trying to make sure that they understand the range of potential hazards and being prepared for whatever comes their way.
At Fastenal, we run into that too, where it needs to be customized to the people and the location. If it's not customized, if you haven't tailored the solution to the people, have you really given them a solution? So I also wanted to point out, Dan, that I knew there was a Tyvek 400, but then you're dropping a 6,000 on me. I was not ready for that. Um, that's a big number.
Yeah, so our products fall into two main categories: what we refer to as general protection, or what people would say a white suit, right? Tyvek and its family of products, and then the Tychem line are our chemical protective apparel. And it was interesting during Ebola, Tychem 2000 was actually the product of choice, not because you needed that level of protection to be protected from the virus, but because they were using a bleach-based decontamination procedure, and you needed that chemical protective barrier to make sure that the bleach decon solution wouldn't get through onto the workers. So, you need to think about not just what the hazard is, but also what the process and use is for those garments dealing with that particular hazard.
Okay, I see where you're going there. Bobby, I have one last out of the blue question that you're not ready for, and I apologize. We talked a little bit about preparedness, but I don't feel like we really hit the idea of labeling. This is something that in my garage at home, I know exactly where everything is, but I'm the only human on the planet that does. If you go into somebody else's location and you want to know where some type of emergency preparedness equipment would be, how big of a deal is labeling?
Oh, it's critical. Not having everything identified and marked clearly, and not just marked on the pole next to the fire extinguisher, right? But at a level
Right.
where people can see it far away, is critical to being able to respond to any kind of an emergency. Or do I know where to go in the event of emergency? So a lot of times, people walking into facilities, if you don't see what is going out in front of you, the horizon, especially visitors that are unfamiliar with the area and may not have a clue where the nearest fire exit is. Not having those marked is a pretty big issue.
Yeah, I can see that being a pretty big issue. So, gentlemen, I feel like I have taken more than enough of your time. Thank you very much for talking today. Any final thoughts for us?
I guess I'll start. DuPont's been in the business of protective apparel for a long time. And if you are trying to think through what your emerging preparedness solutions need to look like, we're here as a resource. Don't hesitate to reach out. We've got technical specialists like myself, regional sales managers all over the country, and we're more than happy to help you think through what your potential hazards might be and what's the most appropriate level of protection that's needed for that, as well as helping you go through the process of training for your people. So we're here as a resource for you. Don't be bashful.
And I'll piggyback on what Dan just said. We are here to support Fastenal and support our shared customers in making sure that they know what's needed and that they have what they need on hand. And through our um, visual workplace safety group for our industrial manufacturing customers, we can provide all that expertise that ranges across all the different product lines to help make sure that you're covered on all bases.
Dan, Bobby, thanks for talking today.
Thanks for having us, Kurt.
Thank you very much, Pierre.